We dismiss the supernatural as the stuff of fairy tale and fantasy, yet Wittgenstein argued that science is mistaken in making it look as if everything can be said. Is our continuing interest in the supernatural and paranormal a sign of an underlying truth about the limits of human understanding, or are we correct to dismiss them as the illusory fantasies of a popular culture? Now, our three speakers are Laurence Scott, who is an award-winning writer and cultural commentator. Julian Baggini is a writer, journalist, and co-founder of the Philosophers Magazine. Now, Deborah Levy is an award-winning novelist and playwright. Her novels include Hot Milk and Swimming Home, and two works, most recently, of memoir, including The Cost of Living. I think that was the latest, wasn't it? So let's get on with it. We've got pitches, we've got arguments, and then we'll hand over to you for questions. So the opening question, and I'm coming to you, Julian, first, is: do supernatural beliefs reflect a truth about the limits of human understanding?
Well, it reflects something about the limits of understanding. I think the point is, people like myself, who are in crude terms are like, naturalist, atheist, materialists, are often sort of accused of having a sort of too narrow imagination. There are more things than heaven and earth that are dreamt of in our philosophy. Although I think there are certain people who belong to that broad camp who are absurdly reductive and think that if there isn't a scientific equation for it, then it isn't really real. I think most people don't succumb to that stereotype. And I think the reason is that I think if you properly accept the limits of reason, as you surely must, that doesn't mean that you only speak of that which can be scientifically validated. It just means that you're very cautious about what you assent to, which lacks evidence, and so forth. And so what I find kind of ironic, really, is that a lot of the people who advocate things like the supernatural and so forth are not really, they say, human reason is so limited, and that's why you have to embrace all these things which are beyond our understanding. Well, no, actually, if human understanding is limited, then confine yourself to those limits and don't sort of leap off into wild speculations about what might be. But one thing I think is worth remembering about this, though, is that when we talk about the supernatural, we tend to sort of confuse two rather separate things. There's a supernatural understood as that which goes beyond the natural world, another dimension, supernatural in the sort of literal etymological sense. But actually, there's a lot of things which are just supernatural, more in the sense of Superman. Just they're natural, but they're incredible. So people who believe in telepathy, for example, these days they don't tend to think that telepathy is supernatural. They think there's some kind of mysterious process which one day science will understand, but it's beyond us. And I think that is the sort of space which makes belief in a lot of things people like myself dismiss as just superstition or groundless possible. Because human knowledge is limited, people can always say, but there's all this other stuff which we just don't understand yet. And I'm not saying it's supernatural. I'm saying that we just haven't caught up with it yet. But it's just empty speculation most of the time.
Thank you, Julian. I'm going to move over to you, Laurence, next. Do supernatural beliefs reflect a truth about limits of human understanding?
Yeah, well, I think the word limits here is really sort of the key one, because to me, human interest, cultural interest in the supernatural always has to do with borders in some sense. The supernatural for me is a threshold space between what can be sort of empirically verified and something which is so deeply beyond our ken that there's no point in even thinking of it. It's literally unthinkable. And so this idea of limit really is dramatized nicely in the case of the Cottingley fairies, which had its centenary last year. It was a story of two girls in Yorkshire in 1917, and using very rudimentary techniques, they tricked sort of many people, including Arthur Conan Doyle, that the fairies they'd drawn and put on hat pins and then taken pictures of themselves with at the bottom of the garden were actually moving. And there was it became sort of a very famous hoax at the time. And one of the reasons people speculate that Doyle was so fascinated with this was that he had a dog in the race in terms of the supernatural, meaning that he'd lost a son in the war, and he had a huge vested interest in being able to communicate with the other side. But what's really most interesting about this is how the two girls grew up into women and responded to it in old age. And I read the interview that Elsie Wright, one of the girls, gave in 1985, And there were a couple of things that she said. She said that ultimately the pictures were photographs of my and my cousin's imagination. And I thought that was a lovely way of hedging it. That was the ontological question, are fairies real or not, didn't even apply to them. You know, it was the wrong sort of questioning. And she said, she was sort of pressed, well, did you fake it? Did you fake it? And she said, I'd like to leave that open if you don't mind. The questioner asked one more time, and she said, let's close it with that. And I loved that almost that couplet at the end of leave it closing on an opening. And that's sort of the threshold space that I think the supernatural in our imaginative lives always occupies. If you look at fairy lore, it's always, you know, the fairies will come on solstice days or days where, at times of twilight, where our world and their world, the borders between are thinning. And I think what's most attractive to us, and that's what I'd like to sort of put forward today, is the way in which the supernatural is always a confounding of categories. It's a neither nor space. The Gothic literary tradition in the 18th century was all about sort of the idea of the ghost who is there or not there, or the werewolf who is neither beast nor human. And I think there's huge imaginative productive space that can come from these sort of border phenomena. And there's obviously something we get out of it.
Let's believe in fairies. Do supernatural beliefs reflect the truth about the limits of human understanding, Deborah?
Well, I think the supernatural expands a truth on the limits of human understanding. We are all haunted by whatever, mum, dad, him, her, they. And the most famous ghost story, one of the most famous ghost stories in the world, is written by Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto. There is a spectre haunting Europe. Derrida picks up on this in his book in 1993, arguing that Marx himself haunts Europe from his grave forever. So because my attention is on language, and I don't just mean literary language, of course the supernatural is going to expand some of the ways I think about and write about the world. The fact that so many people believe that the supernatural is a power that organizes and animates the material universe has to be interesting to me. However, there's that quote from Raymond Carver. He said, if you're ever writing and you're stuck, and you know, and you've got no plot, bring in a man with a gun. And so there's another part of me, you know, if I was writing out, if I was commissioned to write in high genre, it'd be really interesting to write it. But in my own work, if I was going to bring in the supernatural quite literally, I think it would be a bit like bringing in a man with a gun. On the other hand, you'll be familiar with that phrase, he's so straight, he's a little bit gay. And I'd like to flip that for this debate and say we can be so rational, we're just a little bit mad. So my angle on the supernatural is that it's an avatar with which to explore human longings and regrets and desires and anxieties. And the art that I enjoy, so Leonora Carrington and a lot of surrealist art, opens its doors to flirt, if you like, and use the occult, fantasies, hallucinations, and subliminal vistas. And then there are my sisters, the witches, who were burnt for exposing the patriarchy's fear of female potency and sexuality. So I would like to bring them in. And finally, on telepathy, Freud actually did believe in telepathy, but he thought it was going to sink his career.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.